I'm Taylor Barnett. I am based right now in Austin, Texas. And part of the reason why, Swift was asking for people wanting to do discussions around more things that you experience when you're working full time and things that maybe you don't have experience with right now. And I had been really thinking about this idea of working remote. It's not something that a lot of college students are familiar with. And it's not only just before this had become more increasingly popular, but in the age of everyone now being remote, it's even more of a hot topic, a thing that people have more questions about, anxieties, concerns, all valid things. And I kind of had a unique experience after graduating college. I went straight into working remote. So I went to the University of Texas at Austin, and I did not have a strong desire to move to San Francisco or the Bay Area like many of my classmates. I rather have stayed in Austin. And so I kind of explored, is that actually an option? I interviewed with some local companies. I was already working as a software engineer at a startup, and I could have stayed there, but I wanted to do some new things. And I found this opportunity to work for a company, and they were okay with me staying in Austin. The company was already about a third remote. So while they did have an office in San Francisco, I definitely wasn't going to be the only remote. And to them, it was no problem, which was a really unique thing about 5 years ago. It's not, as common now. It's a little changed with the pandemic, but it wasn't common last year, to be able to find stuff like that. And I had never really thought about oh, wow, I'm doing this thing that none of my other classmates are doing. Very few of my friends, some people were why would you want to do that? Some people thought I was not thinking straight. Why wouldn't you want to move to San Francisco? But I just really felt like I had community here in Austin. And so I didn't want to leave that. And so, I did that for about 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And then I worked for a company here in Austin for a little while. But even then, I found myself wanting to be back home at least a few days a week working. And then last year, I joined another company that's in San Francisco, and I'm full-time, again, remote here in Austin. And I think that there's a lot of anxieties and stress that comes with it. It's not this glamorous life like some people like to make it seem. I know somebody had a question about, is it true, is it really freedom? And the reality is a lot of remote people do not, move around constantly. They're at home in one place paying rent, or, living in their house full time. They're not on the road all the time. It's not to say that I haven't taken a road trip and done some work during that time, but most of the time I'm here in Austin. But yeah, I think, I just wanted to have a discussion about talking about some of these anxieties and these things you're concerned about. Obviously, from most questions, I definitely can feel that. And so happy to jump into the questions.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Taylor, for the introduction into your background. And I think it does give some clarity about your experience with this topic. So we're just going to kind of go down the list. And again, for any of those that joined a little late, we're going to answer some of the questions that were submitted formally this morning. And then if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat feature here on Zoom, or you can unmute yourself and actually ask your question as well. And if this is one of the questions that I read off that was yours and you have a follow-up question, please definitely reach out to Taylor after she answers the question. So the first here is, does it ever get lonely, and how do you socialize?
Yeah, I think this is probably the most common question that I've gotten over the years. I first want to say that working during a pandemic remotely is a different experience than normal working remote. And while that may seem like kind of obvious to some people and it not always obvious to everyone, but I think it's really important to like say that over and over again, because a lot of people, you forget about it. You know, you get bogged down about potentially like loneliness and things like that, not being able to be as social as you normally are out like in the city or whatever. And so it kind of, you start being unsure, is this working remote or is this pandemic life? And so first I just like want to preface that a lot of these answers actually, like, I'm going to bring that up because it does change things. I am personally what I would consider an introvert. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like to be social. I like being social. I like being around people. I do it some as part of my job. I have somewhat of a community-facing job at times. So going to conferences and stuff are normally a thing, which they are not in my life right now. But what that really means is how I recharge. So I like to recharge at home. Being an extrovert and recharging around people and being remote is harder. Like those are the people who I think will experience some struggle more with this, because you like being in an office because it gives you energy. Not to say that it doesn't always do that, sometimes for me too. Nothing is like clear cut. You know, I have found things like my relationships with my coworkers and my relationships with my friends and family become more important when I'm working remote. I have to be more intentional. I have to reach out to a coworker to maybe, you know, set up some time to talk about something. Or I have a coworker that will sometimes send me like items on Animal Crossing messages, you know, just like little stuff like that actually starts making it feel less lonely. You know, it does take more energy to build out those personal relationships, whether that be with coworkers, with your friends or family. You know, I have text with friends throughout the day, group texts, you know, outside of work, you know, that definitely makes it feel less lonely. I usually ask people, like, when's the last time you've gone on a work call with someone and it wasn't about work? So many times it's easy to only have calls that are related to what we're working on, and less like 15, 20-minute short chats about just anything, which can sometimes be a little awkward for some people, which is understandable. But you know, for people who might share hobbies or interests with at work, you find that out through like chat or something, you know, being able to like jump on a call and like talk about it occasionally, maybe once a month, can be really break through that loneliness. Another thing, and this is kind of more just like working during a pandemic plus being remote, is I have found, you know, depending on where you live, you know, the rules and regulations right now can differ, but being able just to go meet up at a park, social, like distanced with a friend, just to like hang out for an hour has really kind of given me some energy sometimes if I'm having a tough week. You know, trying to insert those into your daily life can be really helpful. And then the last thing is, like, I've also found that while being remote, my local community, not just local tech community, but just in general, becomes more important. You know, like trying to find ways to participate in it, you know, whether that be volunteering or something else. You know, a lot of these things are also now, you know, online, but even like, for example, I was like watching some bands play that are local the other day on Friday night. And even though, you know, I'm watching it on my laptop, it's still like, oh, this is something that's just happening close to me. Like, it feels still more personal, and you kind of feel this like connection. But yeah, you really have to find what works for you. But you have to it does take more energy in the fact that you have to think about, how do I work this into my daily life, weekly life? But also don't like bog myself down that I'm like constantly like having to like plan things. So finding what that cadence is, what that looks like.
Yeah, and that Makes a lot of sense. And one additional question that this fellow had was, I'm going to kind of summarize, but if there is somewhat industry specific opportunities, I guess, more to work remote than maybe others from your experience, and then how do you kind of brand yourself to get into that area of working remote? If that is.
Yeah. I don't really have a good one on the industry one. The branding one is interesting. You know, this conversation of like brand for developers interesting to me because I've never really thought of anything I've done as like building a brand. I think more of how do I make myself helpful? That can, you know, that could be someone's, you could call a brand, but like just being known as someone who is helpful, whether that be like, you know, if someone's struggling with some project, you know, getting started, or writing a really helpful blog post that, you know, some problem you faced while working on something and you wrote about it and maybe that helps someone else. You know, just being known as a person that from a distance you can still help. And a lot of times that is through writing, or maybe that's through recording some kind of screen share video, or you know, maybe that is helping people in issues and PRs. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can be helpful. But I think, you know, you can really make a name for yourself through that. Like people want to work with, and they want to collaborate with people that are just generally being helpful. It makes it a lot easier when you are remote, when you're known as that person.
That's a great answer. So next question was, how can one mitigate or overcome the disadvantages one might face compared to colleagues who work in the office? So potentially opportunities for promotion, making contacts, connecting, and networking. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah. So this is like probably more general. Some of it is half like general career advice and just that cataloging or writing down or documenting accomplishments and wins, or maybe compliments someone has given you. Like keeping track of these in a centralized place is something I think everyone should do. I know I could be better at this, but it's definitely something I think about because it's really helpful when it is promotion time. Especially if you don't have someone who is a super involved manager or someone who would really go to bat for you, you have to be your own advocate in some ways. And so just like having that list of accomplishments can be really helpful. And it can be something it can be small things, it can be bigger things, having a blend of that. And sometimes that also can be like, say you help someone, like someone was having some kind of bug that was really like really getting them down, and you hopped on a call to like walk through it with them. You know, things like that is what makes you make a name for yourself on a team, like being that person. And that is the person that a lot of times nowadays, when people are looking at promotions in a more comprehensive way, like do you lift the team up? Things like that. The other thing is like, how do you get involved with projects? You know, say there is a centralized office and you're not in it. The best advice I have is like creeping around on chat. Sometimes I don't have a better word than creep, but just like being in the know of what projects teams are working on, what's going on, because, you know, maybe you can, you know, squeeze your way into some of those projects, into some of those, you know, things, because that can, you know, give you more of a reason why, you know, a promotion is justified. It also, you know, just helps you feel, you know, like you aren't missing out because you weren't in the office. It will always be hard when you miss out on like one-on-one conversations that people have at the coffee machine, you know, things like that will always be like hard to overcome. Some teams are better about maybe bringing it up in chat, like, oh, I was just talking to so-and-so in the office, and then you can join in. Not everywhere will do that. That usually is more common when there are more remotes, because they're thinking about, oh, you're not there. But just getting yourself involved and making yourself like kind of be known, they'll remember you more when you might miss out of a discussion. We do a thing right now where I work, we have like office hours with our CTO. And a lot of times those are conversations that people might have had one-off with her in the office, but we've been all doing them virtually. And I think that's really helped. And anyone can jump into, the topics. They'll usually be like 15, 30-minute topics. And you'll know what, you'll know ahead of time what's going to be discussed. And you can just be a fly on the wall. Or if it's something relevant to something you're working on, you can participate more. And usually the thing is like some kind of decision maybe needs to be made, and that's usually the goal. I think the other thing is just having an open dialogue with whoever is kind of your manager or whoever is in that kind of role for you. Sometimes it can be awkward to like bring certain things up, but again, back to being your own advocate, you have to sometimes bring them up. And a lot of times the manager will be thankful for that. They'll be happy that you brought it up because they had no idea. So yeah.
Oh yeah, being a big advocate, especially in being self-promoter, which is a really great resource right now as well.
Yeah. It can be awkward sometimes, but as long as you like space it out, you're not doing it like every single day. No one usually, complains.
Right. So the next question we have here is for some companies, they say they're remotely, but with a boundary. So for an example, hiring remotely within Europe. The question is, doesn't this defeat the idea of going remote? As someone in a country with little job availability, how do I position myself to be able to get a remote job?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't always know why some companies say that. Some have good reasons, some don't. Some are, have restrictions because of some kind of laws or regulations. Some are being maybe a little bit lazy about looking how they could, expand those areas through laws and regulations. Some are less, they care about what continent or country it is, and more they're caring about what time zone, because there's certain roles that it will be harder if your time zones are very little overlap. Some jobs that's fine, like things are in place that makes that work still possible. If you're on a really small team that works a lot together, those time zones become more important. Most of the time though, people are pretty, if that is the reason, they're flexible, to a certain extent. Honestly, I think one of the best things, if you're hitting those restrictions is making yourself known. So back to like trying to be that useful person. I've worked with people on all sorts of time zones across oceans and stuff. And it's really hard to say no to someone who's a really good engineer. And when I say good engineer, I don't just mean like they're really smart or anything. I mean just someone who brings up the team, who really like helps people and makes the whole team better. Like saying no to that, like most teams I know, engineering teams I know, will try to make it work somehow. But still sometimes, there's certain things, barriers that even if the team wants it, the company and it's as a whole will say no for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, I've worked as someone who is on Central Time in the US, I've worked with people all over Europe. And for us, it was never a problem what country they were in Europe. but you know, I know that does exist. It also, some teams are just not familiar with how they can make it work. So sometimes if it is something you really, really want, maybe it makes sense to try to like do a little bit of extra work to show them that it is possible. And try, I think the biggest thing is just find out why are they saying no to you for, you know, location reasons. Because then you can be more like, oh, is this just something that I can't overcome, or is this something I can overcome?
Is there a quick follow-up question to that? Is there an easy way to actually search for jobs that are just remote, or how have you found your opportunities?
All my opportunities have come through like networks of people I've built out. My current job, when I was searching for it, I didn't even publicly say that I was searching, which I had done in the past. And a friend was at a company and was, you know, the job wasn't even listed. So that's number one. So sometimes the whole job listing thing isn't even helpful if the job isn't even listed. The second thing is, there's a good chance they could have potentially put San Francisco down as like where I had to be. But I made it very clear up front, like I'm not leaving Austin. And they, you know, were fine with that. Sometimes it's an awkward conversation to bring that up early on. Sometimes it's in your best interest to not mention you're not going to relocate or something like that. Sometimes it is in your best interest to bring it up forward. You kind of have to judge based on what you think, how flexible that company might be. Because if it's a conversation that comes later and they already really want to hire you, they'll be more likely to work with you. Versus, you know, maybe they don't know they want to hire you, even though you're an awesome candidate. And bringing that up might shut down part of the conversation. So I've always like kind of felt it out without directly being like, no, I'm not moving to San Francisco. You know, there's different sites. I don't know which ones are the best ones right now. They definitely exist. I think they need to get, a lot of these sites still are not great about listing what exactly are the remote restrictions. Like we've been talking about, like some of them have restrictions, and I think the sites don't necessarily make it easy to categorize like only North, South American time zones versus like the whole world versus, you know, stuff like that. I would have to look myself too. But network, I mean, you know, I think someone else had a question related to you getting lowballed or like people wanting to pay you lower salary because of your location, or you just getting a very generic interview, which is probably not giving you a great chance because interviews are kind of broken sometimes, the whole process. I think finding ways to kind of go around the traditional interview process works in your favor when you want to be remote, especially from unique or different places than what they're maybe considering. Finding ways to show your value and to show what you can bring to the team, whether that be through a referral for someone internally, or maybe you're working on an open source project with a bunch of people who are also at that company, and they see like, oh, this person's really like helpful and, you know, great to have working on the project. Making yourself known in other ways so that you don't get shoved into that very like interview process that makes it hard for you to shine. Finding ways to kind of circumvent it, basically, so that then you have a better chance at success.
Great. And that was kind of, answered the next question was low packages or finding remote jobs for new individuals entering into the actual workforce. Did anyone have a follow-up to that question at all? That I saw someone try to unmute a second ago. Okay. All right. The next one is how can one succeed probation period as a new hire during remote work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's probably the biggest difference is just, yeah, like not being there in the office. So I'd kind of go back to what I said about just like, how do you get promoted? The same things about like, you know, just starting a job, you're not gonna always hit the ground running. Like there's very few jobs where you're just going to accomplish so much in a really short time. You're still just like figuring things out. Like, and you're constantly like, you know, potentially even hitting walls. So maybe someone like the documentation for how to get started with this, you know, system that you need to build to be able to work on your first, you know, pull request. I think a lot of the things is like when you do hit those things, making yourself kind of useful by like document, like maybe there's mistakes in there and you find them, updating things to show that you really like you're trying to make the team better, and by like finding things that are wrong in the onboarding process is a great way. I know we constantly ask people who onboard, like if you find something wrong in a wiki doc or some kind of documentation, like update it, like feel free to update it. And if you're unsure about it, like let us know. I think it shows initiative. Like that's what people are really looking for. Like in that early phase of when you've started a job, like they want to know that you will be like a person that will go figure out the answer if you don't know it, or a person who will, you know, not just let a bug in or like something incorrect in a piece of documentation just sit there, that you would like fix it. And just like also chatting with your coworkers, finding, you know, I think a lot of times when someone joins remotely, people are more likely to like be like, yeah, I'll have a 30-minute chat with you. So doing that with people on your team and getting to know them, because then it'll make it harder for them to like not want you on the team, because y'all have more of a relationship then.
Yeah, that makes sense. The second part to this question was, how can a remote developer stay motivated when initial motivation begins to drop? You addressed that a little bit, but I'd love you to give some more detail.
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, there's a few things. So one, I say, like, I personally, and this has been harder now. So when I first started working remote, I managed to finally move my living room around where I could fit a desk into the corner, so that I wasn't working at my very small 2-person like dining room table. It was barely even a dining room table, but and so I think one of the things I found was I wasn't always super motivated to be in the same place for a whole day. So sometimes I would spend the morning working from that desk, and then maybe for a few hours in the afternoon, I'd literally just like in my apartment change location. So maybe I did move to the couch, although I always try not to spend like too much time on the couch. But just like being able to change location. So like in a large, you know, corporate office that is, you know, super big, there's often like different places within that office to work. I mean, of course you have your desk, but they might have some couches somewhere, or they might have some, I don't know, what's the cool thing now? I think like pods or something, like just different places to sit and work. I think that does more for motivation than I think a lot of us realize. Like, I think just changing scenery, even if it's literally a different view of the same room, can actually like help motivate you. So that's like looking around you. Then there's also, I say, like looking inside of you. So maybe trying to dig into like, why do you feel not as motivated? Are you maybe not learning enough? Do you maybe just really struggling on the project you're on and could use some advice from someone who's more senior? Is it you don't feel like you're accomplishing enough, and so that then demotivates you to keep on trying, you know, things like that. I think one of the things I do, and I say it's like we have to like set up ourselves for success. I try to write everything I'm going to do each day on like a Post-it. And I try to keep it like they're not too big of tasks, things I'm trying to accomplish. Like today, one of mine is like, I need to finish up this pull request for a thing. So that's a checkbox that I literally write out on the Post-it. And the thing about the Post-it is it's only so big. So you can only fit so many things on there. So you can't typically, unless you're writing really tiny, overwhelm yourself. And I find just like checking off the boxes helps my motivation to keep going. If you find yourself maybe not checking off enough boxes, maybe you need to write less things the next day on that Post-it. You know, just like finding ways to also have small wins. So maybe there's something on that note that's literally like reply to this person's email. That's something so small, but by doing it, you're like, well, I accomplished something. And so just finding little small wins you can create for yourself can help that motivation. Because sometimes if you're working on a project and the ticket that you're working on is rather like potentially kind of bigger, you're not going to be able to move that over to being done for maybe a while. And so that's why you need to break down kind of the tasks that you need to do. I'd also say motivation while working during a pandemic is different. There's a lot going on. Be not as hard on yourself. I know the last few months I have not been as productive or motivated on a week, and it goes in waves. I think I'm doing better, and then I have a week where I'm doing less. I'm lucky / privileged to work with a team that understands that. Not everybody has gotten that, but I think more and more managers and team leads and stuff like that are understanding that people aren't maybe working under the same set of motivations that they normally are. I can share this later, but there's a really good blog post that's called, if you search Weathering the Emotional Storms of a Crisis. It's on the First Round Capital blog, but it's these two women authors, Liz and Molly. They actually wrote a book about like emotions at work. But it really like talks about like while working during a pandemic is different and how to maybe be a little kinder on yourself about that, and don't be as hard on yourself.
That makes sense, definitely. So another question here was, how can a remote engineer avoid giving excuses for underperforming? And obviously, again, taking this current situation out of the mix, because that's directly to your point that you just made, motivation and productivity may not be as lucrative right now. What are some ways to circumvent that?
I'd say in general, first, like getting good, maybe not even great at working remotely is not going to happen in 3 months. It's going to take time no matter what is going on in the world. And you'll get better at it, and then you'll like kind of get worse at it, and then you'll get better at it. And it's constantly like a give and take. It's constant like iteration on trying to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. I think I feel this myself, like I don't want to make excuses, but at the same time, you know, there's weeks where I'm just a little off in general, no matter what's going on. I'm really curious if the person is on chat or something, like what are the kinds of excuses they feel themselves giving? Because I feel like there could be a lot of different like sources of that. Whether that be like, why did you not fix this bug fast enough? Like the excuses for that aren't necessarily maybe even related to working remote, you know? So it's like, it depends like what exactly are the excuses.
Yeah, that's a great point. So if you guys are on the chat, you can pop that into, the chat. We can revisit momentarily. Another one here is, what can working remotely what can make working remotely a bad experience? So
Yeah.
really just for those that are entering into the workplace now, what are some pitfalls that beginners should avoid while starting to work remotely?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I just thought of something on the last one. One of the things I really struggled with when I first started working remotely was that when I felt like I was maybe like going on social media or Twitter, that I was like just occasionally throughout the day that I was slacking off. Like that was a like weakness, like that was a bad thing that I was doing. And then I realized through conversations with coworkers and just other people, when you're working remotely, your version of going to get coffee or going to the restroom and then you stop by your teammate's desk and end up having a 15-minute conversation, or just these like little things that happen in the office because all these people are in one place, that aren't sitting at your desk writing code. Those aren't usually in an office, unless you're doing it a lot, considered slacking off. So why should it be considered slacking off when you're doing it at home? It's taking short little breaks, just making sure they don't last, an hour, but eating lunch and not being at your computer for 30, 40 minutes is not slacking off. That's just giving your brain a break and is totally normal. So if that is something you feel like is maybe, you want to make an excuse for those things, that's, not really a thing you need to make an excuse for. But going back to like, what can make it a bad experience? So I was writing a list of all the things that I slightly failed at. Not having a dedicated space. So trying to work from my couch, bad idea. It's fine if you're doing it for a little bit during the day, but I really recommend trying to have an actual chair. Even if that is at your dining room table, it's better, because like the human head is like 10 to 11 pounds, and doing this and looking at a laptop is like really straining your upper back. And I started having back problems, which I had never had before. So a couch is okay, but just don't spend the whole day if possible. Like just really try to get a chair. And that doesn't need to be a computer chair, just like any kind of chair that isn't a couch. Another thing is like a monitor is not a requirement. Like it's a nice to have. Like I often don't even use a second monitor, but sometimes I do. But what's really important is just having your laptop at eye level. So back to like the back pain. So you could, if you have some textbooks or some books, lift up your laptop so that it is higher, so that you're putting less strain. Or if you have an actual like laptop stand, that works too. But it's really easy to not do that. Like these are things that like normally you could also do this in an office and fail at it, but at home it's even easier, just because it's not a normal office setting, and you don't always initially think about it until like maybe there's a problem. Not having just in general, like a bad experience is not having other remote coworkers. I often think that teams that only have, very, very small number of people who are remote, it's going to be not as good of an experience. And the reasons range all over the board. Like the way people communicate sometimes. I'd say before everyone was working at home at my company, I was one of the few remote, but some of the things that make it better is like if there's a strong culture of like writing things down. So whether that be technical decisions or just like different documentation, like there's a strong culture of writing. So that makes it better. But, for example, AV, on your audio and visual, when there's a meeting going on in the office and you're the one remote person, it has the potential to kind of suck if they aren't thinking about it. So feel like I've always been, at first I was a little timid about like mentioning issues, and now I'm like, can't hear you, like very upfront, because I don't want them to go on for 5 minutes and me not being able to hear. That's not fair to you. Just things like that. having work hours, you know, some people can work random hours throughout the day and that works for their lifestyle and they're happy with that. But a lot of people also need kind of like, this is when I start work, this is when I end work. Mine might vary a little bit on the end, because most of my team is like on the West Coast, so there's 2 hours difference. So sometimes I will some days hold meetings a little bit later, but especially when my hobby is climbing. When I need to go meet my friends at the climbing gym at 6:30, I can't like be doing a meeting at 6 o'clock. And so, you know, having those kinds of boundaries. But sometimes also, if there's something I really want to still accomplish, I take a break and maybe for an hour at night, I go back and work on it. That's fine with me. But you have to figure out, like, is that what works for you? If you find yourself like not being able to relax at night because of it, which is really important for your brain to like kind of calm down, maybe you need to be a little bit stricter about when you work. And having like rituals that like help you start the day and end the day. So, you know, in the morning, a shower, and then after that is work time. So that kind of signals to you like, okay, I'm doing this thing.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say we have a couple more questions in the last few minutes that we had had for today. One of the other questions that's fellow sent in was really just the idea of a separate free time from work time, and how to have that clear-cut distinction, especially if you're using the same devices for both your free time activities and then also to your work activities.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely things like I don't put work email on my phone. That's like one example. I'll put chat, but it like notifications get snoozed after a certain time. Like use the features that are available in different chat things to try to like, calendars have the ability to like block, like Google Calendar has the ability to block off like what are your work hours, things like that. Because then when people try to schedule meetings, they'll see it and maybe they'll try to shift. You know, I'm still usually flexible with like if it really needs to happen, we can make it work. But just finding ways to block that off and put your hobbies and your free time activities on your calendar sometime too. That also really helps. Like I will put like what night I'm going to go for a run, because then nobody will schedule me for that time.
Oh yeah, we did have one more question that came in through the chat over here. It says, working is one of the main ways of building social circles. How do you overcome the lack of human face-to-face contact when your work social circle is entirely remote?
Yeah, I think this goes back to a little bit about local community and just like trying to find ways to do things locally. I know in some places things are opening up where you can go meet someone at a park, or you can meet someone outside. Right now, that's like the main place that feels more safe. Just like trying to find ways to build that into your week. You know, definitely people are getting tired of doing video calls all the time. Like there's like a whole science behind like why that's still exhausting. And just like trying to find ways to have you know, in-person things. For me also that involves some of my hobbies, although most of those are on pause now, like climbing. When things start opening up and meetups are still like start being a thing, like in-person meetups, find maybe one meetup to go to every 2 weeks or something like that. You know, things where you can be face-to-face, go have lunch with someone that maybe is also remote, maybe not within your company, things like that.
Perfect. Great. And as we kind of wrap up here, if anyone has any additional questions, you know, feel free to unmute yourself or add that into the chat. But yeah, so far getting a lot of, you know, thanks for some great advice and some tips. So they appreciate all of that. Any kind of last minute thoughts that you have before we sign off for today?
Yeah, definitely like what works for everyone isn't going to be the same thing. It's not, you know, one size fits all. You have to find what works for you, iterate on that. It may come down to maybe it isn't for you. You know, there's some very clear things that this is not going to, you've tried a lot of different things and it's not going to work. That's possible. For many of us though, you know, we're constantly been iterating on this for years, 5 years in, and I still have a lot to learn and get better at it. But at the same time, I have found it super rewarding to be able to live in a place that I've chosen to live in, and it's really worked out. So I at least tell people to give it a chance.
Perfect. Well, again, there's a couple more things that have come in on the chat for your advice and your answers. And we will, like I mentioned, be putting this up for others to actually see as well. And if they have any other additional questions, you guys let us know and we can reach out to Taylor here and pass those along.
Sounds great.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Taylor. Really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your day.
You know, same for everyone too. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.